It started on a Monday morning. The kind of morning when the air still smelled of dew and new beginnings. My wife, Claire, had just returned home after 18 months deployed overseas, and I had barely slept from the excitement of knowing she was finally safe under the same roof again. She stepped out of the car with her duffel bag, her boots still carrying dust from the desert, her hair tied back in that no-nonsense braid she always wore in service. She was home, and for me that meant the world was right again. But the moment she set foot on our driveway, a shrill voice split the calm like a blade. "Excuse me. Excuse me. Who are you and what do you think you're doing here?" There she was, Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of our HOA, bloated with arrogance, marching down the street with a clipboard clutched against her chest like a weapon. She wore that smug grin that had become infamous in our neighborhood, the kind that made people duck behind curtains rather than risk her attention. She squinted at Claire as if she were a criminal breaking into her own home. "This is not a military base, and we have rules about unauthorized tenants," Karen barked, her fingers stabbing the air. "I will not tolerate strangers moving in without HOA approval." Claire froze, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. She had faced mortar fire, desert storms, and nights where death hovered close enough to hear it breathe. But nothing had prepared her for being called a stranger in her own home. I stepped forward, my voice steady but sharp. "This is my wife," I said, my hand tightening around Claire's. "She lives here. She belongs here. And you, Karen, have no right to question that." But Karen wasn't done. Her voice grew louder, carrying across the street until blinds shifted and neighbors peeked out from their windows. "Spare me the drama. I know exactly what's happening. You're trying to sneak her in without board approval. That's against Section 14, Paragraph 3 of HOA policy. We can and will fine you. And if you resist, we'll escalate legally. Don't think your little story about her being your wife will excuse the violation." She smirked, certain she had trapped us in her web of rules. Claire's jaw tightened. She dropped her duffel bag onto the driveway, the thud echoing like a drumbeat of defiance. She reached slowly into her jacket, and for a moment Karen actually stepped back, unsure of what was coming. Then, with a calm that carried more authority than any HOA bylaw, Claire pulled out her military ID. She held it up to the light, the emblem gleaming, her photo and rank staring back undeniable. "Staff Sergeant Claire Donovan, United States Army," she said, her voice carrying the weight of command. "I don't need your permission to live in my own home." The effect was immediate. Karen's mouth opened, then shut, like a fish gasping for air. She blinked rapidly, her smugness faltering as the weight of authority pressed against her ego. A ripple of murmurs moved through the small crowd that had begun forming at the edges of their yards. People stepped out, whispering to each other, their eyes darting between Karen's clipboard and Claire's ID. The contrast could not have been clearer. A woman who had given everything to defend her country, and another who had done nothing but bully her neighbors with fine print. Karen, red-faced but still desperate to hold on, tried to laugh it off. "Oh, please. Anyone can print a card these days. That could be fake. For all we know, you're playing dress-up to avoid consequences." Her voice cracked with forced bravado, but the words fell flat. A man from across the street, Mr. Holloway, stepped forward. He was usually quiet, but his voice carried when he said, "That's no fake. My brother served with the Army, and I'd recognize that ID anywhere. You owe this woman an apology." Karen snapped her head toward him, furious that her authority was crumbling. Stay out of this. Holloway. This is an HOA matter. You don't understand the legalities. But another voice chimed in, a woman clutching her child at the edge of the driveway. Legalities don't erase service. She fought so we could all stand here safe. And you mock her. Shame on you. Karen's face flushed crimson, her clipboard trembling in her grip. She tried one last desperate tactic, flipping through her papers and shrieking. You think military service exempts you from community rules? No one is above the HOA. But her words, once sharp enough to cut, now sounded weak, hollow, even laughable. Because in that moment, everyone understood the truth. Karen had built her power on fear, not respect. And fear dissolved in the presence of someone who had faced real battles. Claire didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply looked Karen in the eye and said, "You don't scare me. I've seen what real enemies look like. And they were far braver than you'll ever be." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's bravado shattered. Her face slack with humiliation. She dropped the clipboard, the papers scattering across the street like leaves in the wind. She spun on her heel and stormed away, muttering curses under her breath, her empire of intimidation collapsing around her. But the story didn't end there. Later that evening, when the sun dipped below the horizon, a knock sounded at our door. It wasn't Karen. It was Mrs. Gwen, an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. She held a plate of food in her hands, her eyes brimming with tears. "My husband was in the Navy," she said softly. "He didn't come home. Thank you for your service. Thank you for surviving." Claire's stoic composure cracked, and for the first time since she had returned, she allowed herself to cry, not from pain, but from the overwhelming reminder that she wasn't alone, that her scars and her ID carried meaning here too. From that night forward, the neighborhood shifted. Karen's grip weakened, her voice no longer commanding obedience but inviting ridicule. The same people who once bowed to her rules now crossed the street to avoid her glare. And as for Claire, she walked proudly through those gates every day, no longer questioned, no longer mocked, but respected as she always should have been. And so the truth stood unshakable. A clipboard cannot outweigh a life of service. Rules scribbled in ink crumble against sacrifice written in blood. What about you? Do you think Karen's public humiliation was justice served? Or should she have faced even harsher consequences for her cruelty?